I have to watch the little circle go around to wait for it to tell me we started. Hopefully that will happen soon. Maybe. All right. Welcome to Bible study for Wednesday. Today is March 10th, and we are in Numbers chapter 31. Now, a reminder, we've been traveling through the Bible one chapter at a time. We started back in Genesis, and we're covering the first 5 books called the Pentateuch. These are the books that are attributed to Moses's authorship, meaning Moses either wrote them or he helped compile the original stories from various leaders and made sure that they were written down and collected to be transmitted to the people of God. And so the Israelites have just gone through yet again another major disruption. They're coming out of their time of wandering around the desert for 40 years. Now, they had to do that because when they first approached the promised land and God said, all right, it's go time, they went, those people are really tall and scary and strong, and the land's really good, and they're going to fight hard for it, and we don't want to fight. And God said, oh, you're not going to be faithful and listen, and you're not prepared to trust me? Then let's wander around the desert. And we're going to wait for that unfaithful generation to die off, and we're going to wait for your children to be ready to enter into the promised land. So that has happened. And now they're getting ready to once again go into the promised land. So they've had a census, they've redescribed what is expected of worship and the types of festivals and the types of vows that people can make to follow and honor God in the Israelite community. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation of the conquest of the Midianites in chapter 31. Then the Lord said to Moses, on behalf of the people of Israel, take revenge on the Midianites for leading them into idolatry. After that, you will die and join your ancestors. So remember, Moses is originally, God's like, oh, no, you're okay. You tried to keep the people faithful. When all the other people die, you can come into the promised land. But Moses gets angry when the Israelites are in the wilderness again and they're complaining there's no water, and Moses gets angry and disobeys God, and he strikes the rock and he says, must I do everything for you people? And God says, about that, you weren't the person who was doing everything. I am the source of everything, and now you've entered into their own idolatry as well. Now you too can't go into the promised land. So God is now saying, lead the Israelites in taking their revenge. And this is going to be your last great part of this journey. After this, you will die. Now, as modern Americans, we tend to be very peace-loving people, or many of us are, and we look at warfare and revenge, and we say, why would God tell them to do that? But remember, they're about to go enter into a promised land that is already occupied, already has Canaanites and all kinds of different tribal affiliations, and there will be war. And so God is helping them get ready and prepare. And what better way to prepare than to fight against the people who led them astray in the first place, to hopefully serve as a reminder of the high cost and consequence of following other gods and other peoples instead of Jesus, well, instead of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But this pertains to us as well. We would do well to remember that when we are following other gods besides Jesus, there's a pretty high cost to that rebellion that is paid in the warfare that we make within ourselves, our souls, our communities, of the divided loyalties. So here we are. Moses says to the people in verse 3, choose some men and arm them to fight the Lord's war of revenge against Midian. From each tribe of Israel, send 1,000 men into battle. So they chose 1,000 men from each tribe of Israel, a total of 12,000 men armed for battle. Then Moses sent them out, 1,000 men from each tribe, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, led them into battle. They carried along the holy objects of the sanctuary and the trumpets for sounding the charge. They attacked Midian as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they killed all the men. All 5 of the Midianite kings, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, died in battle. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. So something interesting happens. They take all of their holy objects out to war with them. The Israelites are honoring that God has made this request of them, and they are bringing their worship with them. For the Israelites, there was no sacred and secular divide. There was no political and religious divide. All of life was integrated around the connection with God. And it was similar for the other cultures around them. There was not this sort of socio-political side of you and your religious side. Everything was interconnected. And that is part of why we're entering into a large portion of warfare that doesn't sit well with us, because we tend to separate people from their religiosity and from their God. And in this portion, they don't. And so the Israelites, if they embrace these people, they're embracing their gods. This is not something that sits well with us, nor does it need to, but it's something to observe and be aware of. So verse 9, then the Israelite army captured the Midianite women and children and seized their cattle and flocks and all their wealth as plunder. They burned all the towns and villages where the Midianites had lived. After they had gathered the plunder and captives, both people and animals, they brought them to Moses and Eleazar the priest and to the whole community of Israel, which was camped on the plains of Moab beside the Jordan River across from Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was furious with all the generals and captives who had returned from the battle. And we go, I wonder why. Why would Moses be angry right now? We're going to find out in just a moment. But this is where we see, again, a distinction between what does God have in mind and then how do people execute it. This is something that is really important to pay attention to, because we still today have people who make very grandiose proclamations of this is what God wants, and therefore this is how we're going to do it. And there is a disconnect between what God wants and how people carry it out. And there always has been. And just because we are objecting or saying that something's not right with how it's being carried out or executed or done does not mean we disagree on the principality of what God wants. For example, I agree God does not want abortion. God does not want children to die. But I disagree with how we are to carry that out. I think the best way to make that happen is to expand access for women and children to healthcare and social welfare and food and stable housing and employment that meets their needs and can provide for them. So I would be on the different side of the spectrum as somebody else who would say the best way to do that is to make abortion illegal. We don't disagree on what God wants, but we disagree on how to get there. And this is something that we as a Christian community need to relearn as a skill, that we can disagree on the execution and come back to talk about what does God want. And so here, we're going to find out what God wants from Moses, and it probably will send a shudder down your spine. Because verse 15, Moses says, why have you let all the women live? These are the very ones who followed Balaam's advice and caused the people of Israel to rebel against the Lord at Mount Peor. They are the ones who caused the plague to strike the Lord's people. So kill all the boys and all the women who have had intercourse with a man. Only the young girls who are virgins may live. You may keep them for yourselves. Ew. We don't hear Moses pray. We don't hear Moses ask God, what should we do with these people? Moses inserts his own wisdom here. We might disagree with it. We might not think it's the best idea. But where is Moses's perspective in this? These are the women who led them astray. Therefore, they will continue to lead you astray. They cannot be trusted. They are a source of pollution in our community, and therefore they must be executed. I don't agree with it, but I can understand the logic. Where Moses says is, you got to kill all the boys. Why? Well, remember, there's no standing army. Armies were made of families and people with commitments to revenge. And so Moses, for practicality's sake, says, don't let anybody who's going to have a blood feud against us live. Kill the boys. I don't like it, but I see the logic. Next, Moses says, but the little girls, the innocent ones, those who've never had sex with a man, those you can have and keep for your own pleasure. I don't like it. I see the logic and I still really don't like it. And I hope you don't either. It's not, again, this is where we continually in Bible study, we have to hold intention and remember proscriptive versus descriptive. There are many, many portions of the Bible that are proscriptive, where God is speaking through prophets and people and telling us what we are to do and how we are to do it. And that's a prescription to follow. Other portions of the Bible are description. They are describing what God's people did in between the times where God was offering prescription. This is a descriptive moment where Moses is choosing how to implement the prescription of God that they would take revenge against the Midianites. But it's describing how Moses used his leadership and his wisdom in that time, in that place. I really don't like it. I hope we don't ever go back to this type of thinking, but it is part of our human brokenness and fallenness that we see people as objects for our benefit. And that is what happened here. So after they have killed off women and boys, and they've kept the innocent ones, girls that presumably they thought, well, these are malleable and young and naive, and therefore they haven't been polluted by all of those other thinkings and teachings of their mothers, and therefore they will grow up into good Israelite wives, concubines, servants, etc. We know this isn't true. We know that pollution, quote unquote, remains because, girls learn from their mother, and girls are going to be profoundly affected by watching their mothers be killed, and they're probably going to have some resentment toward their captives, their captors. This was not wisdom, but it's what Moses chose. So what happens next? Verse 19. And all of you who have killed anyone or touched a dead body must stay outside the camp for 7 days. You must purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd and 7th day. So stay outside the camp, purify yourselves. This I agree with. I'm happy that taking a life bears a high cost and you don't just get to go back to life as normal, enjoying your new concubine that you brought home. You have to atone and be cleansed from this moment. And so what they're talking about with the cleansing and making yourself clean is fasting and ritual bathing that acknowledges the literal and figurative blood that is on their hands. I think we need to remember the high cost of our wars and our disagreements with our fellow man. So I'm glad that this was part of what they did. But they also had to purify your clothing and everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. Then Eleazar the priest said to the men who were in battle, "The Lord has given Moses this legal requirement. Anything made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, or lead, that is all metals that do not burn, must be passed through the fire in order to be made ceremonially pure. These metal objects must then be further purified with the water of purification. But everything that burns must be purified by water alone." Back when we were talking in Leviticus and we were talking about the purification laws and the reasons behind a lot of these laws, a lot of the law was designed to keep the Israelites healthy. That's why there are so many chapters about mold and what to do when you see it in your house and who to tell and how to get rid of it, how to clean it, and what to do if it won't come clean. God is interested in protecting the community and provides some instructions that seemingly God knows about modern germ theory. Go figure. So God is telling them, hey, anything you're bringing that you can burn to sterilize, you should do that. And anything that can't be burned, at minimum, you should rinse it and wash it. Again, they are getting ready to go into a time of incredible conflict with various tribes and leaders and places around the promised land. And to limit the spread of contagion and disease, these are some really smart, good practices. And on the seventh day, you must wash your clothes and be purified, and then you may return to camp. So don't bring foreign diseases home from war with you. You got a mini quarantine, 7 days away, washing everything, burning everything in the fire to heat it up that can be. And hopefully then you will not infect your community. So now we get to the goods. We talked about the people. What about all the stuff that they brought back? And the Lord said to Moses, "You and Eleazar the priest and the family leaders of each tribe are to make a list of all the plunder taken in the battle, including the people and the animals. Then divide the plunder into 2 parts. Give half to the men who fought the battle and half to the rest of the people. From the army's portion, first give the Lord his share of the plunder, one of every 500 of the prisoners and of the cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats. Give this share of the army's half to Eleazar the priest as an offering to the Lord." So you have to tithe off of plunder? Yes. It doesn't matter how you get things, God expects some of it back as a blessing. So when we get a big stimulus check so far, we've tithed off of that, even though it wasn't income. We didn't earn it. It just came to us. But it's kind of like plunder, and we tithed off of it. The army has to as well. And it makes sense. Take half for the people who actively fought in the battle, who risked their lives. And then you're going to divide what's left among the wider portion of all the people remaining in Israel. So from the half that belongs to the people of Israel in verse 30, take one of every 50 of the prisoners and of the cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, and other animals, and give this share to the Levites who are in charge of maintaining the Lord's tabernacle. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The plunder remaining from everything the fighting men had taken totaled 675,000 sheep and goats, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 virgin girls. Half of the plunder was given to the fighting men. It totaled 337,500 sheep and goats, of which 675 were the Lord's share, 36,000 cattle, of which 72 were the Lord's share, 30,500 donkeys, of which 61 were the Lord's share, and 16,000 virgin girls, of whom 32 were the Lord's share. Now, does God want virgin girls? No, God does not need sexual gratification, and God doesn't really need girls. So presumably, unfortunately, these girls were divided amongst the Levite households that served the tabernacle to serve as servants or domestic slaves, or, unfortunately, likely for sexual gratification. Sometimes we like to say, oh, the past was pure and holy, and if we could just get back to the time when everything was right with God, we'd be fine. Sin came in the garden and has been here ever since, and there is no time that we can go back to that we're not going to deal with the problems of racism, misogyny, unequal wealth distribution. Those have always been here, and they're here right here in the Bible. So, half of the plunder was given to the fighting men, and half of the plunder belonged to the people of Israel. And Moses separated it from the half belonging to the fighting men and totaled the same amounts. Now we go, well, they just wrote that down. Why do they need to write it again? Moses is keeping a history that shows it was truthful. There really was half. It was exactly divided evenly between, and we tithed exactly as we were supposed to. We're not going to read all of that because it gets really repetitive, but it's recorded just like we record on our bank statements every transaction as it goes in and out, because it's proof that we did what we said we were going to do. Verse 48, then all the generals and captives came to Moses and said, we, your servants, have accounted for all the men who went out to battle under our command. Not one of us is missing. So we are presenting the items of gold we captured as an offering to the Lord from our share of the plunder, armbands, bracelets, rings, earrings, and necklaces. This will purify our lives before the Lord and make us right with him. So they're giving a thanksgiving offering, even though they call it a purification offering. They're saying, we are so grateful and thankful that we realize that we didn't lose a single man in battle, that we are giving an extra portion back to God in gratitude. So Moses and Eleazar, the priest, received the gold from all the military commanders, all kinds of jewelry and crafted objects, and all the gold that the generals and captives presented as a gift to the Lord weighed about 420 pounds. All the fighting men had taken some of the plunder for themselves. So Moses and Eleazar the priest accepted the gifts from the generals and captives and brought the gold into the tabernacle as a reminder to the Lord that the people of Israel belonged to him. So we've had our first big battle in getting ready to go back into the promised land, and we've had a whole lot of plundering. So now what's going to happen is the tribes are going to start talking about the land and where they are to go. And the tribes of Reuben and Gad owned the majority of the livestock. So they've seen that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were ideally suited for their flocks and herds. So they come to Moses and Eleazar the priest and the other leaders of the community, and they say, notice the towns of Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Sibmah, Nebo, and Beon. The Lord has conquered this whole area for the community of Israel, and it's ideally suited for all our livestock. If we have found favor with you, please let us have this land as our property instead of giving us land across the Jordan River. So these herdsmen tribes say, hey, this land's already perfect for what we need. We just want this. This is good with us. And Moses responds, do you intend to stay here while your brothers go across and do all the fighting? Moses asked the men of Gad and Reuben. Why do you want to discourage the rest of the people of Israel from going across to the land the Lord has given him? Moses saying, hey, we just had a battle. We just conquered all this land. And now you're like, we're good. We're done. We're just going to stay here. That's fine. You all can go on ahead and make more war. We're done. That's not really fair, considering all of the tribes participated in the conquering of this portion of the land. And so he continues, verse 8, your ancestors did the same thing when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. After they went up to the valley of Eshcol and explored the land, they discouraged the people of Israel from entering the land the Lord was giving them. And the Lord was very angry with them, and he vowed, of all those I rescued from Egypt, no one who is 20 years or older will ever see the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they have not obeyed me wholeheartedly. The only exceptions are Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and the Kenizzite, and Joshua, son of Nun, for they have wholeheartedly followed the Lord. The Lord was made angry with Israel and made them wander the wilderness for 40 years until the entire generation that sinned in the Lord's sight had died. But here you are, a brood of sinners, doing exactly the same thing. You are making the Lord even angrier with Israel. If you turn away from him like this and he abandons them again in the wilderness, you will be responsible for destroying the entire nation. And the people kind of go, oh, no, that's not what we meant, Moses. We're sorry. And so they approached Moses and said, we simply want to build pens for our livestock and fortified towns here for our women and children. Then we will arm ourselves and lead our fellow Israelites into battle until we have brought them safely to their land. Meanwhile, our families will stay in the fortified towns we build here, so they will be safe from any attacks by the local people. We will not return to our homes until all the people of Israel have received their portions of land. But we do not claim any of the land on the other side of the Jordan. We would rather live here on the east side and accept this as our grant of land. Then Moses said, all right, if you keep your word and arm yourselves for the Lord's battle, and if your troops cross the Jordan and keep fighting until the Lord has driven out his enemies, then you may return when the Lord has conquered the land. You will have fulfilled your duty to the Lord and to the rest of the people of Israel, and the land on the east side of the Jordan will be your property from the Lord. But if you fail to keep your word, then you will have sinned against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will be found out. Go ahead. Build towns for your families and pens for your flocks. Do everything you have promised. Then the men of Gad and Reuben replied, we, your servants, will follow your instructions exactly. Our children's wives, flocks, and cattle will stay here in the towns of Gilead, but all you who are able to bear arms will cross over to fight for the Lord, just as you have said. So Moses gave the orders to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders of the clans of Israel. He said, the men of Gad and Reuben who are armed for battle must cross the Jordan with you to fight for the Lord. If they do, give them the land of Gilead as their property when the land is conquered. But if they refuse to arm themselves and cross over with you, then they must accept land with the rest of you in the land of Canaan. So this is, again, succession planning. Moses has been told he's not going into the promised land. He's not going to see the way all of these battles will play out. And so Moses acts as a responsible and wise leader, and he makes sure that the agreements that he has made on behalf of Gad and Reuben and on behalf of God are transmitted to the other leaders who will be carrying on forward. Sometimes we really mess up as churches and as individuals when we fail to follow this example. We make agreements or plans, but we don't have succession planning. We don't have the thought of who's going to carry this on after I die, and are my promises going to be fulfilled? Moses makes sure that yes, they will be. Verse 33. So Moses assigned the land to the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh, son of Joseph. He gave them territory of King Sihon of the Amorites and the land of King Og of Bashan, the whole land with its cities and surrounding lands. The descendants of Gad built the towns of Dibon, Ataroth, Aroer, Atroth Shophan, Jazer, Jagobah, Beth Nimrah, and Beth Haran. These were all fortified towns with pens for their flocks. The descendants of Reuben built the towns of Heshbon, Elealeh, Kiriathim, Nebo, Baal-meon, and Sibmah. They changed the names of some of the towns they conquered and rebuilt. Then the descendants of Machir, the tribe of Manasseh, went to Gilead and conquered it, and they drove out the Amorites living there. So Moses gave Gilead to the Machirites, descendants of Manasseh, and they settled there. The people of Jair, another clan of the tribe of Manasseh, captured many of the towns in Gilead and changed the name of that region to the towns of Jair. Meanwhile, a man named Nobah captured the town of Kinath and its surrounding villages, and he renamed that area Nobah, after himself. So the Israelites are beginning to find their places and to make a claim. This is part of the ongoing hostility in this region today, is this land was never unoccupied, and throughout history, it's had different people come in, take it over, rename all the towns, and make it their own. And so depending on whom you listen to as to whom has the rightful claim, that argument still continues, especially after what will become later as the Muslim conquest expanded over the region. So Christians, Muslims, and Jews all have tried to lay claim to different pieces of land. This is who had claim here in this moment of time as the people inhabited the land. Remembering Israel's journey. So before they go in, they're going to remember where they've come from and how they got here. This is the route the Israelites followed as they marched out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's direction, Moses kept a written record of their progress. These are the stages of their march, identified by the different places where they stopped along the way. They set out from the city of Ramses in the early spring on the 15th day of the month, on the morning after the first Passover celebration. The people of Israel left defiantly, in full view of the Egyptians. Meanwhile, the Egyptians were burying all their firstborn sons, whom the Lord had killed the night before. The Lord had defeated the gods of Egypt that night with great acts of judgment. After leading Ramses, the Israelites set up camp at Succoth. And then. So this goes on for many verses, all the way down through verse 48, where it talks about all of the places where they have camped along the way. And we're not going to read those individually. I invite you, if you want to study the journey that the Israelites took through the wilderness, to look at these in conjunction with a map within a study Bible for more information on the route. One of the things that I would just observe to you is this route was not linear. This route did not take them directly from point A in Egypt to point B, the Promised Land. They go on quite the zigzaggy journey, avoiding areas of major encampments and finding places where there was natural resources to sustain them. So verse 50. While they were camped near the Jordan River on the plains of Moab, opposite Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, you must drive out all the people living there. You must destroy all their carved and molten images and demolish all their pagan shrines." God says this land is polluted. This land is full of false worship. This land is full of things that will lead you away from your commitment to me. Take away all of those problems. Take possession of the land, verse 53, and settle in it, because I have given it to you to occupy. You must distribute the land among the clans by sacred lot in proportion to their size. A larger portion of land will be allotted to each of the larger clans and a smaller portion to each of the smaller clans. The decision of the sacred lot is final. In this way, the portions of the land will be divided among your ancestral tribes. Verse 55, there's a but. Whenever you hear but, it's important to pay attention. because this is God saying, so here's what I want for you. Here's how I want it to work out. But I know in reality, you're not going to follow perfectly or faithfully 100%. So here's what's going to happen when you don't. But if you fail to drive out the people who live in the land, those who remain will be like splinters in your eyes and thorns in your side. They will harass you in the land where you live, and I will do to you what I had planned to do to them. Dun, dun, dun. So that's the end of chapter 33. And we are going to pause there. So we have just 3 more chapters to go in the book of Numbers. And we're not going to have Bible study next week because I will be on vacation. So we're going to wrap this up the Wednesday of Holy Week with Numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.